This is the 2023-2024 Annual Grower Meeting video presentation for the grassland drainage area. This is the nitrates and groundwater session. It was recorded in Los Banos, California live, January 30th, 2024. Please note you may need to adjust your volume as this was not professionally recorded. This video and its verification form provides for meeting requirements for the grassland drainage area's 2023-2024 annual grower meeting. It is a requirement to review the video and return the verification form. The 2024 annual grower meeting video verification form can be found at the westside.org website and must be sent back to the coalition. This video was shot live during the 1/30/24 meeting in uncontrolled conditions and as such is not studio quality. To augment your understanding of the meeting, you can download the PowerPoint slides at the westside.org website that were used during the live session. Interspersed throughout the video are 3 simple questions and answers. Transfer the answers to the video verification form described above and send back to the coalition as explained on the form.
Welcome. Thank you for coming. I know you don't have a choice, but thank you for coming anyway. My name is David Corey, farmer down in the CCID area, so all these forms that Orville's talked about, I've filled them out myself, and even though I've worked with regional board for years trying to develop them and make them as streamlined and sort of as understandable as possible, even when I sit down and fill them out, I scratch my head and think, oh man, this is a difficult thing to do. So I feel your pain, but realize that this is, as Orville said, one of the things that we need to do, and there are some concrete things that we're trying to accomplish in terms of improving water quality associated with it. So it's not all bureaucratic nonsense, but there's some of that weaved in there. So I'm going to be talking today about nitrates and groundwater. This is one of the big issues that the state is focusing on over the last really 10 years. It's really trying to control nitrate discharge to groundwater. Early on, it was really looking at pesticides and surface water issues, but the groundwater issue was really taking over a lot of the issues the regional board are dealing with. This is just a map of the Central Valley, looking at generally the higher elevation or higher concentrations of nitrates in groundwater. This is high level, just looking at generally speaking where they are. There's a lot of, as you see, a lot of the red spots are in the Southern Valley, but there's also some red spots in our area as well. This is again estimates of what these nitrogen levels are in the groundwater. There's certainly localized conditions in any one of these areas that could have high levels of nitrates. So the regional board is looking for all growers to control their nitrates discharge to the groundwater, not just those areas that happen to be in red. Regional board, in looking the task that they set us out on, trying to understand what's happening in the underground, it's really a difficult task. The groundwater, water quality in groundwater is incredibly complex. There's surface and groundwater interactions. When you have rivers that go through there, you've got recharge from the rivers, you've got recharge from farming and overlying ground issues. You've got what's going on in the hydrology and the climate. You've got land use, other land uses other than just farming. You've got the dynamics of the groundwater itself, and as water moves through the vadose zone and getting into groundwater, there's different processes that take place. So it's really difficult to understand what's taking place in the groundwater itself. But that's the task that the regional board has been given, to protect groundwater, and that's the task that's been assigned to us, to try and estimate what are the impacts of grower impacts on nitrates and other constituents in groundwater. But on this talk, we're really focusing on nitrates. So how does agriculture impact nitrates in groundwater? It's pretty straightforward in terms of this level of the diagram, right? We all farm. In order to farm, we have to put some sort of nitrates on, or nitrogen on the ground. And when you do that, you can't be 100% efficient. It is just impossible to be 100% efficient. Even if you're drip irrigation and feeding it directly to there, you're not going to be 100% efficient. But what we can be is as efficient as we possibly can. So when you're putting nitrogen on your fields, fertilizers, you're irrigating that. Inevitably, some of that nitrogen will leach with your with the water, whether it's your irrigation water or rainfall that hits the ground later. It will push past the bottom of the root zone so the crop can't use it anymore, and it will move through what they call as the vadose zone, which is basically that block of ground of earth between the top of the, between the root zone and the aquifer itself. So the nitrogen will move through there. It changes, has a lot of physical processes that take place. It will ultimately make it to groundwater. What we're trying to do, and what the regional board's asking us to do, is to minimize that leaching of nitrates to groundwater. Again, there's a lot of different ways we can do that. A lot of it is efficient irrigation. You can look at timing of your nitrogen application rates and those sorts of things, but trying to be as efficient with nitrogen is really what you need to do, what they're looking at us to do. We'll earlier talked about the INMP summary reports, those nitrogen use reports that you fill out that looks at how many pounds of nitrogen you're putting on.
Verification question number 1. As a member of the coalition, are you required to attend annual grower meetings when notified? The answer is yes. Again, the question. As a member of the coalition, are you required to attend annual grower meetings when notified? The answer is yes.
Each crop, what's your yield, and those sorts of things. Those reports that you're turning in is the basis for how we're calculating and estimating what the nitrate leaching to groundwater might be. You're looking at what's applied, we're looking at what's removed in the crop, and then we're running it through a model that is designed to estimate what actually happens to that. It takes into account the soil type, the aquifer, other recharge issues. There's all of those complicated issues I talked about in the earlier slide. We're trying to look at all of those dynamics and figure out what's actually happening to this nitrogen when you put it on the ground. One of the things that I'm sure Orville talked about in terms of those reports, it's really important that you turn those reports in. He talked about the consequences of doing that. Because I was late, I don't know if he mentioned some of those consequences of not turning in forms. They can fine you $1,000 a day for being late with a form. Now, keep in mind, they won't get around to actually coming after you for this for a year or more after you've missed the deadline. So you could end up with a $365,000 fine for not turning in a form, because they can fine you $1,000 a day, and it doesn't.
Have they ever done that before?
They've done that on. They've had some really onerous fines on folks who didn't sign up for the coalitions. Don't remember if they've done it on the forms on these INP summary reports, but that's the next step. I've been in regional board meetings in which growers didn't sign up for the program to begin with, and they had some pretty compelling stories as to why they didn't sign up. Because well, I won't go into the details of it, but they were pretty compelling stories. And basically, the approach of the board members, this comes in front of a subcommittee of the board, and it actually is authorized by the board itself, but it's actually the board members. Their approach is, look, the fines are going to be incredibly harsh because we know we can't catch everybody. So we're going to set an example of those who happen to come up in front of the board. And it's hundreds of thousands of dollar fines for relatively small acreage for not signing up. And the same methodology is likely what they will use for someone who doesn't turn in their forms. Now, you'll get some notices, but you'll get the notice of the coalition. At some point it'll get escalated where you get notices from the regional board directly. If first off, you shouldn't ignore the notices from the coalition, because that's the friendly reminder. When you get to the level of the regional board and they issue a notice directly to you, definitely don't just throw it in the round filing cabinet. You need to deal with it, work with the coalition, resolve this matter, because the longer you delay, the worse it's going to be for you. So anyway, that's a little bit digression, but those forms are important to turn in. What we're looking at in using those forms is we're coming up with township leaching estimates. So we're trying to look at, on a township basis, how much is leaching from irrigated agriculture to the groundwater. We're required to come up with this formula that uses the INP summary data to figure out how much is actually potentially leaching. We are also required to come up with targets, so on each township that's in a high vulnerability area, we have to estimate how much nitrogen can that aquifer handle without exceeding the water quality objective. In township, 6 miles by 6 miles, so we're looking at 23,000 acres in that area, in that township. If the township is not in compliance with the targets, the coalition is going to have to work with all those growers within that township to figure out how we can be more efficient with our nitrogen and reduce that leaching to groundwater. If we can't figure it out, we'll end up in a similar place that Orville talked about with the surface water quality management plans. They will slowly and surely enforce against us and make it more and more difficult in terms of regulations to be able to farm, putting more onerous regulations on how much you can farm and trying to, although they technically can't dictate how you farm, they can tell you how you should not farm. So it's essentially the same thing. We have some flexibility right now to try and figure out what's the most efficient way to meet these objectives. But if we can't meet these objectives, we can't, whether it's surface water or groundwater, they will force us to comply over time. Now, that slow enforcement action may make you believe that it's not going to happen. Ultimately, they will enforce. They have no alternative but to do that because that's the mandate from the law, and the state legislature will support that.
Verification question number 2. Question: what is the purpose of groundwater nitrate targets? The answer: state regulatory compliance. Again, the question: what is the purpose of groundwater targets? The answer: state regulatory compliance.
So these are just the townships within the coalition. We're looking at this at a township level when we're looking at what's coming in the INP summer reports. There's another aspect to this as well, that if you're in an area that is, according to our targets and our values, you actually are in compliance on a township level, the regional board also expects each grower to achieve a minimum nitrogen use efficiency, basically based on agronomic ideas. So they want everybody to have a minimum nitrogen use efficiency. We're currently trying to work up these, what they call acceptable ranges. So it will be a range of nitrogen use efficiency for different crops. So this would be crop specific. They want every grower, even if you're in an area that isn't impacted by groundwater, to meet these minimum requirements. So it will be different by different crops. Different crops have, it's easier to achieve certain nitrogen use efficiencies than others, so we're working that out on a crop specific level. When those get developed, there'll be 2 sort of metrics that you'll be looking at in your groundwater and nitrogen use. There'll be the target, that's what you've actually estimated to discharge, or what we can discharge, versus the value of what you've actually discharged. And then there'll also be this acceptable range issue, which is sort of an agronomic minimum threshold that every grower has to meet. So just to keep in mind, we're not alone in this fight and this regulatory process that Regional Board has. There are a lot of different sources of nitrogen that leach into groundwater. It's not just agriculture, although we're one of the largest segments because we cover the entire Central Valley, really, and there's a lot of different places where it can leach. But there's also, when you look at this, there's agriculture, there's dairy, there's city wastewater where they leach to groundwater, there's food processors, there's other various discharges of nitrates to groundwater. All of these dischargers are being regulated to make sure they can control and achieve water quality objectives in groundwater. So again, why do we care about nitrates in groundwater, right? This is really a drinking water issue. They're concerned about the health impacts of drinking that groundwater. Because we all have domestic wells out here. A lot of us who's in this room have domestic wells. So we're really looking to protect that groundwater use and that drinking water use. One of the I guess options that they've given us is to form a management zone with other other industries, other discharges of nitrates to get together, form a management zone, and take authority over a groundwater basin and say, okay, we're going to work collectively with the dairies, with the cities, with the food processors to try and collectively minimize our discharges to groundwater. This management zone approach does a lot of things for agriculture, right? Rather than having to meet our water quality objectives and meet at the bottom of the root zone immediately, it will give us more time to actually comply with these regulations of discharging the groundwater. It'll be the least burdensome ways to form and join these management zones, because a lot of times it gives us more time to figure out how we can be more efficient with our groundwater, with our nitrogen use. One of the big things that this does, we have to, again, organize with other discharges of nitrogen, but also the first step in this process when we've taken ownership, and this is sort of the big bargain that we made with the regional board, is within the basin, within the management zone, we've agreed to test wells, all domestic wells. We'll go out and try and have a testing program where you can test domestic wells, not just on-farm wells, but every domestic well in the entire management zone to see if it's high in nitrates. If it's high in nitrates, we have to supply substitute water to those households so that they have usable drinking water. So the basic trade is, look, if you resolve the immediate drinking water needs of the domestic water users within your area, we're going to give you more time to figure out how you can manage your nitrogen use, minimize the leaching to groundwater, and ultimately restore those groundwater basins. Those efforts will be quite expensive, right? We have to go out and get outreach to different households to get them to test their wells. If they're tested and they're above the objective, we have to supply substitute water. This will increase our costs significantly moving forward, but it's significantly better than the alternative, which is the regional board would come in and say, you have to meet 10 milligrams per liter at the bottom of the root zone immediately. Frankly, we can't do that. It's not really achievable right now. So this option of a management zone is the least burdensome way we can achieve these, gives us more time to comply, and it also solves the immediate needs of those folks who have nitrates, groundwater, or their drinking water is impacted with nitrates. So I think that's all I have for my... I talked through one of the slides, but basically what I covered there. Again, we're looking at immediate needs, trying to test wells, but also trying to deal with the control our nitrates and ultimately bring these aquifers into compliance with drinking water standards. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them. All right.
Verification question number 3. Question: will growers in some townships be required to increase nitrogen use efficiency to achieve groundwater targets? The answer: yes. Again, the question: will growers in some townships be required to increase nitrogen use efficiency to achieve groundwater targets? The answer: yes.
So basically, this slide is basically looking at the on-farm drinking water requirements that we have to conduct annual testing of drinking water wells that are on your parcels itself, on the parcels that's enrolled in the irrigated lands program. This is different from what the management zone approach is. That management zone is testing every domestic well across the entire coalition, whether it's on ILRP enrolled parcel or not. If it's high in nitrates, we have to figure out how to give them different wells. We have to report that on the ILRP lands. We have to report that to the regional board. So we got the next farm plans will be in 2025 for the farm evaluation plans. I talked about the farm groundwater protection formulas, values, and targets. We're generating those. We use the INP summary data to come up with the value We're comparing it with this model calculated target that we have on a township level, and we're gonna be comparing those, what's actually being discharged on a township level to the target itself. And if we're above, if we're not meeting those targets, we're gonna have to work with the growers within that township to become more efficient and actually meet those numbers. I talked about acceptable ranges, and then the management zone where we really, gives us more time to comply. So again, just one final thing from my perspective, make sure when you get the forms from the coalition, as painful as it might be, sit down and fill them out accurately. If you need help working through that, your districts and the coalitions can help you fill it out. As I often do, I put these things off because I don't want to do it until the last minute, and then I'm trying to furiously put it together at the last minute and get turned into Orville so he doesn't give me a sad face. It's often more difficult to put these things together than you might think they are. Even for me, who's intimately involved in developing them, it all doesn't, your fields don't always fit exactly right as you want them to be. So do it a little bit early so you might have some time to actually fix things and meet those deadlines. All right.
Please remember to transfer the 3 answers to the video verification form, and using the instructions on the form, return it to the coalition. And if you need further assistance with the verification form, contact Friedrich Fourier at 559-582-9237 or at his email address below. Thank you.